people say the feeling starts halfway up the stairs. The higher you climb, the less alone you feel. And maybe that's why some hikers stop climbing entirely after sunset. Because something about the Koko Crater Railway Trail changes once darkness settles over the crater. During the day, it feels almost ordinary, crowded with tourists, photographers, fitness enthusiasts, and people chasing sunrise views over Oahu. But at night, the staircase becomes emotionally different in ways people struggle explaining calmly afterward. The crowds disappear. The wind grows louder. The crater walls begin swallowing sound strangely. And at some point during the climb, many people stop focusing on reaching the top, and start checking behind them instead. Over time, stories spread about strange experiences on the staircase after dark. Footsteps with no visible source. The feeling of being watched from the darkness surrounding the trail. Hikers suddenly turning around midway through the climb despite wanting to continue only minutes earlier. And what makes those stories difficult to dismiss completely is that the environment itself seems perfectly designed to amplify fear. Because some places become unsettling because of stories, and some places seem to create the stories themselves. Most people who climb Koko Crater after dark describe the same thing first, not panic exactly, but a strange emotional shift that begins gradually during the ascent. At the bottom of the staircase, the city still feels close enough to keep you grounded. You can hear distant traffic, see lights from nearby neighborhoods, and convince yourself you're still connected to ordinary life. But the higher you climb, the more that feeling starts fading. The staircase rises in a nearly straight exposed line along the volcanic crater with very little protection from the darkness surrounding it. And once visibility narrows, the environment begins affecting perception in ways people often underestimate. Every sound becomes sharper. Footsteps against the old railroad ties echo differently than expected. Wind moves unevenly across the crater walls, sometimes sounding almost like distant movement or low voices carried strangely through the air. And this is where the tension begins building. Because once the trail empties after sunset, there's nowhere for the mind to relax. No nearby stores. No large crowds. No reassuring signs of ordinary activity. Just a steep staircase disappearing upward into darkness. And at some point during the climb, many people describe the same unsettling reaction beginning almost automatically. They start checking behind them repeatedly even when logic tells them nobody should be there. Not because they clearly saw something. Something stranger than that. The growing feeling that the environment itself no longer feels neutral. And once that feeling starts, it becomes difficult to stop noticing every sound behind you. Every shadow beside the trail suddenly matters. Even the staircase itself begins feeling unnaturally long, as if the summit keeps moving farther away the longer you climb. And maybe that's why some hikers suddenly realize they're climbing faster without consciously deciding to. Because at a certain point, the emotional goal stops becoming reach the top, and quietly becomes get off the staircase. Long before the trail became one of Hawaii's most famous hikes, the staircase served a completely different purpose. During World War II, the railway leading up Koko Crater was built as part of a military transportation system carrying supplies and personnel toward observation posts near the summit. What remains today are the original steep wooden railroad ties stretching upward along the volcanic ridge, more than 1,000 uneven steps exposed fully to wind, open sky, and the enormous crater surrounding them. During daylight, the staircase feels physically exhausting but manageable. Groups of hikers stop for photos, laugh through exhaustion, and admire sweeping views of Hawaii Kai, the Pacific Ocean, and the coastline stretching across Oahu. And that contradiction is exactly what makes the nighttime atmosphere so unsettling. Because the staircase exists in one of the most beautiful locations in Hawaii, yet many people describe feeling deeply uncomfortable there after dark. The railway was never designed to feel welcoming. It was built for function, not comfort. The climb is steep, exposed, and visually unforgiving. And once darkness removes depth perception from the crater walls surrounding the staircase, the environment begins generating psychological pressure naturally. Humans are extremely sensitive to places where retreat feels emotionally difficult and visibility becomes uncertain. And Koko Crater amplifies both conditions perfectly after sunset. The farther upward you climb, the more emotionally disconnected you begin feeling from the city below even though it remains physically close. The crater walls distort sound strangely. The staircase narrows visually in darkness. And because there are few visual reference points once the trail empties, the environment starts feeling isolated in a way completely different from daytime Hawaii. Which may explain why so many people describe similar emotional experiences there after dark. Because whether the stories surrounding Koko Crater are paranormal or psychological, the physical structure of the place genuinely feels designed to trigger discomfort once visibility disappears. And this is where the stories surrounding Koko Crater stop sounding like simple internet folklore. Because people who climb the staircase after dark often describe remarkably similar experiences despite arriving on different nights and under completely different conditions. Some report hearing footsteps behind them only to turn around and find nobody visible anywhere on the trail. Others describe sudden emotional heaviness appearing halfway through the climb for no obvious reason. Some hikers admit they began avoiding looking toward certain darker areas surrounding the staircase despite knowing logically there was probably nothing there. And whether those experiences come from exhaustion, fear, suggestion, or something else entirely almost becomes secondary once enough people begin describing the same emotional atmosphere. Because the consistency itself becomes unsettling. And this is where it stops making sense in a normal way, because Koko Crater rarely produces dramatic paranormal stories. Most people don't describe seeing obvious apparitions or impossible events. The discomfort is much subtler than that. More psychological. More invasive. Some climbers describe suddenly wanting to leave the staircase as quickly as possible without understanding why. Others admit they became irrationally focused on sounds behind them even when no one else was visible anywhere on the trail. And maybe that's what makes the staircase feel so believable as a mystery. Because fear becomes much stronger when people cannot clearly identify what is causing it. The environment slowly gets inside the mind instead of attacking it directly. And once that emotional contamination begins, ordinary experiences start feeling threatening in ways difficult to explain afterward. A gust of wind suddenly feels deliberate. Distant movement becomes emotionally loaded. Even silence begins feeling unnatural. And maybe that's why so many people describe reaching a point during the climb where they stop feeling curious and start feeling watched. What makes Koko Crater especially unsettling is that nothing visually dramatic needs to happen for the experience to become emotionally intense. There are no ruins hidden near the summit. No abandoned structures buried inside the crater. No obvious source of danger beyond the staircase and the darkness surrounding it. And maybe that's exactly why the location affects people so strongly. Because fear becomes more psychologically invasive when the brain cannot identify a clear threat. During daylight, the trail feels social, energetic, and alive. But after sunset, the exact same staircase transforms emotionally in ways many climbers struggle describing afterward. The exposed climb begins feeling endless. The darkness surrounding the crater becomes impossible to ignore. Every sound suddenly matters. And once the mind enters that heightened state, ordinary experiences begin feeling emotionally distorted. Wind moving across the crater walls starts sounding almost intentional. Distant movement becomes difficult to dismiss calmly. Even silence begins feeling heavy in a way that doesn't feel entirely normal. And at some point during the climb, many people stop focusing on the summit completely. Their attention shifts toward leaving the staircase as quickly as possible without fully admitting why. And that reaction matters because it reveals something deeper about places like Koko Crater. Sometimes environments themselves create emotional tension strong enough to feel almost supernatural even when nothing impossible is visibly happening. And once a location repeatedly creates that emotional response, stories naturally begin attaching themselves to it over time. Because humans remember places that affect them psychologically in ways they cannot fully explain afterward. So do strange things actually happen on Koko Crater after dark? One explanation is simple, that the staircase naturally amplifies fear because of isolation, elevation, darkness, and psychological exposure. Humans are deeply sensitive to environments where visibility collapses and retreat feels emotionally difficult. But that explanation doesn't fully remove the tension. Because people continue describing remarkably similar emotional experiences tied to the exact same location. The feeling of being watched. The urge to check behind them repeatedly. The strange emotional heaviness appearing midway through the climb. And maybe that's why the stories surrounding Koko Crater continue spreading long after the hike ends. Because whether the cause is paranormal or purely psychological almost becomes irrelevant once enough people leave the same place carrying the same uneasy feeling. And that possibility is what keeps the staircase unsettling. Not proof. Not evidence. But emotional consistency. The fact that so many people climb those stairs after dark, and walk away feeling like something about the experience still doesn't feel completely right. And maybe that's why some locals refuse to climb Koko Crater alone after sunset. Because once the city lights below start feeling emotionally distant and the crater walls swallow the sound around you, the staircase stops feeling like a tourist attraction entirely. It starts feeling like a place that does something to people. And maybe that's why some hikers reach the top of Koko Crater after dark. But never stay there very long. Some places become mysterious because of stories. And some places seem to create the stories themselves. And if this made you question how certain locations can feel completely different after dark, you're not the only one thinking it. And you're in the right place. Join us next time. Tilt and chill. Stay curious.